scholars. This is Ryan Lewis, and I'm going to be talking about John Locke and his second treatise. Here's the abstract for this. John Locke's second treatise of government is what many call the blueprint for Western civil governments. His ideas on having three branches of governments, which weren't his ideas, he actually got that from the Romans, have been utilized throughout history, and almost all civil governments have used his ideas of using the government to protect the civilians' rights to life, liberty, and property in one way or another. Locke asserted that men are born free, and we give away certain liberties to a monarch/government in exchange for safeties and convenience. This social contract, Locke says, should never be broken, and if anyone infringes on the people's rights, then it is up to the government to use the law to give justice to people for their protection. If it's the government who infringes on the people's rights, then it is the people's job to change the monarch/government in charge with the power of legislative branch. Here's some background on John Locke and his early life. John Locke was born in England, and his father was a lawyer who fought in the English War. And his family was Puritan, and his dad had good connections within the government and church, and because of that, he was able to get into high education at Westminster School in London, which led to him going to university at Christ Church, Oxford University. You may have heard of it. And after he graduated, during his medical studies, he met Lord Ashley, who eventually became Earl of Shaftesbury. He became close with Shaftesbury and was eventually persuaded to move in with him, become his personal physician, and eventually actually moved up to be even closer with Shaftesbury with his position. Shaftesbury had good connections, and because of that, put Locke in a position for success. Shaftesbury had a huge influence on Locke's professional success and political thoughts, as Shaftesbury was a founder of the Whig Party. Locke eventually wrote his two treatises of government, and we're going to be talking about the second one. In his second treatise on civil government, Locke writes about his theories and philosophies on property, natural rights, and the social contract that all citizens agree to. He insists that everyone is equal and has the same natural rights that can be realized through reason. These writings were some of the most influential pieces in the creation of governments after the revolutions of America and France, becoming the blueprint for civil governments moving forward. In this second treatise, he talks about many things, and first we're going to talk about natural rights and laws. Locke says that everyone gets the same natural rights, and they can do whatever they want with those rights except abuse others by impeding on their rights. If someone decides to impede on someone else's rights, then Locke says it is up to the government to provide justice for the civilian. The rights that the government is protecting are the rights to life, liberty, and property. These words will make a reappearance in later revolutions in America and France, and you must have heard of them somewhere in history class or somewhere else. Locke also says that these rights and laws would still remain in nature with no government. This means he believes that justice and morality remain in any circumstance with any person, so it doesn't have to be a structured civil government for these natural rights and laws to exist. They are bestowed on you from your moment you're born. Next thing he talked about was property. Locke provides a thought-provoking question at the beginning of his chapters on property. He basically says if it's everyone's purpose to survive using the earth, and if everyone uses the earth for the same purpose, how can we correctly define one's individual property? Locke believes that individual property is gained through the work put into to attain one thing. If a person picks an apple from a tree, then the apple becomes theirs. This has become the person added their labor to it. This also works with money. You work for your money, and that money is now yours, and you can do whatever you please. There are also limits to possession, natural limits. If you pick a bunch of apples and you just let them stay outside, they're gonna rot, and that's its natural limit. Everything has its natural limit. There's nothing that doesn't have a limit. The individual property also goes for land. If a person builds a house, makes a farm, the land anything is built on is theirs, unless it has already been claimed, because you cannot take from someone else's land. You can't impede on their right to property. There's a quote on the right here from John Locke. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has a right to but himself. So obviously this is going further on the property of a right, the right to property. It's every man has his property that is his own. You cannot take it. No one else can have it. Next thing he talks about is liberty. He says all men are born with freedom and liberty, but are put under ownership of their parents. This is called paternal power. This is given to the parents until the child grows to be mature enough to take care of themselves. This is because as a child you are obviously not nearly mature or smart enough to take care of yourself, so that is why the paternal power is given. Many people get this confused with political power, according to Locke. Political power is not meant to control the civilians' lives and action. It is there to protect the people's rights and govern behavior of criminals, which is actually one of the largest examples of libertarianism being popularized. On the right, John Locke says, all mankind being equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. So we are all born being equal, independent, without any power going over us. So that is why we cannot impede on each other, because no one has the right to do that. We all have our rights to our own separate things and not to take anyone else's. Next thing Locke talks about is government. John Locke's thoughts on liberties and powers are the basis for his ideal government system of the three branches, legislative, executive, and judicial, which he got from the Romans. In his ideal system, he says that the governing rule belongs to the majority. The government's sole purpose to Locke is to protect the natural rights and enforce natural laws and behaviors. So the behaviors we are talking about is the impeding on someone else's natural rights. He also says that the reason that dictators, czars, or monarchs come to power is that the people get confused with paternal power and continue it into their governments, which should not be the case. To the right, we have another quote from John Locke: government has no other end but the preservation of property. So this is just saying straight up, the government, it has no other role but to preserve your rights. Here's some more on government. In order for people to enter society with a protective government, the people must give up some liberties in exchange for protections. For example, the U.S. with the Second Amendment, they have the right to guns, and that's their liberty, but the safety is a little bit less. If we put in a law for stricter gun control, then it would be giving up some liberties in exchange for more safety. This is the basis of society with governments. Everything is a trade-off for liberties and safety. If the government fails to work for the people's benefit, then the people will have to take over and change the government. Locke says this is their right. It is their right to change the government if it does not benefit the people. This thought process will also be eventually adopted by future governments. As you can see to the right, Benjamin Franklin has a quote: "They who can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." He is influenced by Locke, and Ben Franklin is obviously one of the founding fathers to form the American government, which, as we will see, is one of the most influenced from Locke. The two biggest influences Locke has on future governments formations after revolutions are the United States and France. The United States changed the life and liberty and property as the basic rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is obviously because they took lots of land from Native Americans and cannot justify putting a property in a right that cannot be impeded. They also use the three branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative, but it didn't turn out that legislative was the most powerful, but that necessarily isn't because of the founding fathers. That is because of people like Andrew Jackson into the future giving the executive branch more power. They also followed the belief that the government is there to serve and protect the people, protect their rights. They obviously had the Bill of Rights and Constitution to put on paper the protections that the people have. Thomas Jefferson also had direct influence from Locke when he was writing the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, he starts off with "We the people." It is in the interest of the people. The next one is French, who obviously took influence from the United States and Locke. Locke influenced Voltaire and Rousseau, who played large parts in the philosophy of government after the French Revolution. They are some of the biggest thinkers of the time in France. France followed the natural rights of life, liberty, and property in their formation of government and had a majority rule-based government. Their flag comes to represent liberté, égalité, and fraternité, which were the ideals of the French Revolution, and it shows with their flag. These two governments also ended up influencing other governments, the biggest examples being Liberia, Japan, and Korea. They all have their own constitutions, are in the best interest of the people. Thank you for watching. That is all I have for you today.